Chapter 486 to 487. Morning of the next day. Kuroto brought Kurenai to the Hokage office for the purpose of repeated inquiry, and after submitting the report he had prepared yesterday, along with the report Kurenai prepared as per Kuroto's instructions, the two waited for Hokage-sama to read the report. Initially, Kuroto thought that Sandaime-sama would order Kurenai to reiterate everything in great detail, so Kuroto was prepared to control Kurenai into not speaking anything he doesn't want her to. But unexpectedly, Sandaime-sama just read the report silently, sighed once or twice, then asked 3 questions, and finally instructed both Kuroto and Kurenai to go back and rest. In fact, Sandaime-sama did not even bother to issue an investigation mission of the location Orochimaru took Kurenai to. Of course, even if he did order, it would make no difference as the location marked on the map was a fake one. Kuroto himself checked the map that Kurenai added to her report and knew that the location marked on it was a false one. I do wonder if the location she has marked in the map has traces of fighting around it, because if not, Kurenai might be under the suspicion of betrayal, thought Kuroto as he left the Hokage office. After leaving the Hokage building, Kuroto looked back in the direction of the Hokage office and thought inwardly, has the situation already gotten to the point that Sandaime-sama is unable to pay much attention to this incident? After all, an Umbu of the elite Team Ro was kidnapped. Not just an orphan of the civilian class, okay. Kurenai is indeed an orphan of the civilian class, but this doesn't change the fact that she is also an Umbu member of the elite Team Ro. And yet Sandaime Hokage seemed absent-minded during the entire inquiry and didn't seem to care much that she was kidnapped by Orochimaru, of all people. Of course, it's not that he doesn't care, it's just that he is too preoccupied with much more important things. And Kuroto quite a lot about it. These days, the surface of the village seems quite peaceful and calm, but Kuroto knows very well that this is just the calm before the storm. According to the information given to Kuroto by Pakura and Yagura, yesterday night, Yondaime Reikage of Kimogakure has also secretly arrived in Konoha, and counting the Kazekage and the Mizukage, 4 of the 5 Kage of the 5 great nations are currently present in Konoha. Only the Sandaime Tsuchikage Inoki of both scales has not yet arrived for the time being. However, Hokage-sama has already given information to the Reikage, Mizukage, and Kazekage that Sandaime Tsuchikage Inoki has also agreed to participate in the 3rd Gakage Summit, and is currently on his way to Konoha. Thinking of all the information relayed to him by Pakura and Yagura, Kuroto thought, if everything is taken into account, then the day Akatsuki will attack Konoha will probably be around the time when all 5 Kage have gathered in Konoha. And since Hokage, Reikage, Kazekage, and Mizukage are already present in Konoha, and Tsuchikage is also on his way, this means that the day of Akatsuki's attack is approaching closer and closer. At this time, Kurenai, who was silently walking next to Kuroto, suddenly raised her head and said, Kuroto-kun, don't you think Hokage-sama seems a bit strange lately? This matter concerned Orochimaru and Amatsukami, yet Hokage-sama only asked a few questions and then ordered us to leave. In fact, to me he seemed absent-minded the entire time. What do you think could be the reason behind Hokage-sama's strangeness? In order to deal with the inquiries of Hokage-sama, Kurenai spent the entire night preparing herself to make sure that she doesn't leave any loopholes. But Hokage-sama didn't seem to be too attentive during the entire inquiry, making Kurenai feel a bit regretful that she wasted the entire night for nothing. When Kuroto heard Kurenai's doubts, he almost had the urge to hold her by her collars and ask her, shouldn't I be asking the same question from you? Because to me, you seem stranger than Sandaime-sama. But Kuroto chose to calm himself and answered her, I felt the same way. Perhaps Hokage-sama is very busy dealing with other things. After saying up to here, Kuroto took a pause, then continued, it may also be possible that the Hokage-sama we met up with was just a shadow clone, while the real Hokage-sama is somewhere else dealing with other issues. A shadow clone? Muttered Kurenai in a wondering tone, then continued after a pause. But isn't it one of the rules that the Hokage is forbidden to use Shadow Clone for doing his main duties? People assume that Shadow Clone is omnipotent and can do everything that the original can, but that's actually not true. The Shadow Clones also have their limits. Different shinobi have a different level of mastery over the Shadow Clone jutsu. Most shinobi cannot use their Shadow Clones to carry out sophisticated tasks that require a lot of thinking and analysis, because everything Shadow Clone does require chakra, even the normal tasks like breathing and thinking, and not everyone has that level of chakra. Moreover, the Shadow Clone must be in close vicinity of the original, else it will lose the mental link with the original, and its performance will instantly dwindle, resulting in either its disappearance, or it will only do what was initially instructed to it at the moment the Shadow Clone was formed. Initially, Kuroto was also troubled over this issue when he started to leave behind Shadow Clones in the village to act as his replacement, but because of the presence of Toyotama/Ryumyaku chakra, this issue was resolved. Toyotama may be sealed within the Ryumyaku gourd that isolates all external chakra perception. However, Toyotama is still connected to Kuroto's soul and helps him maintain a mental link with his Shadow Clone. The presence of Toyotama also ensures that his Shadow Clone never runs out of chakra, so for Kuroto, it is not big of an issue. But even then, Kuroto never creates more than one Shadow Clone, when he has to leave behind shadow clone to act as his replacement, because as the more shadow clone one creates, the more difficult maintain the mental link with the shadow clones becomes. Perhaps only Uzumaki Naruto can make use of shadow clones like a bug jutsu to make his shadow clones do everything. However, that's mostly because of Kyuubi's chakra, but even he has his limitations, and this was clearly shown after he became the Nanadame Hokage and had to rely on the intake of too much caffeine to maintain the mental link with all his shadow clones, else they will all collapse. Kuroto nodded. True, use of shadow clone to carry out Hokage's duties is forbidden, but this rule is only applicable in normal times. If there are emergency situations, then Hokage-sama is allowed to use shadow clones to act as his replacement. It was Naidame Hokage Senju Tobarama himself who made this rule, because he, as the creator of the shadow clone jutsu, perfectly understood the limitations of this jutsu. Listening to Kuroto's words, Kurenai had a downcast look and asked, "What do you think is Hokage-sama dealing with?" "How am I supposed to know? I am not the Hokage," said Kuroto with a sigh, and after a pause he continued, "But it has to be very important." Nodded Kurenai lightly, then started looking at Kuroto's face from the corner of her eyes. Kuroto noticed her small actions and asked while touching his face, "Is something on my face?" Kurenai flinched, then immediately shook her head. "And no, nothing." And as if to change the topic, he suddenly said, "Kuroto-kun, I want to increase my training." Kuroto looked at Kurenai for a while, and seeing the determined look in her eyes, he sighed and said, "We will talk about your training after you have completely recovered. Just rest for now. This is an order." Kurenai pouted and said nothing, although she was busy thinking, Kuroto-kun and Futen indeed look quite similar. Perhaps Futen was really a member of the Hyuga clan. Looking at Kurenai's thinking face, Kuroto thought, "I can also use this time period to understand your strangeness, and decide whether to dispose of you or not." The two people who were on different channels walked side by side with a comfortable silence when the fork in the road came, and their paths were diverging. Kuroto suddenly remembered something and asked, "Do you remember the secret izakaya where we wanted to celebrate our academy graduation, but couldn't because we were too young to drink?" Kurenai went into a thinking pose, then as if she suddenly remembered and nodded. "Oh, that one in the Eastern Bloc, right? What about it?" Kuroto nodded. "Yes, the one in the Eastern Bloc tonight. Asuma has organized a celebration and invited every one of your generations. The timing is 07 to 00 p.m. Don't be late." After thinking a little, Kurenai nodded with a yawn. "In that case, I must catch up with my sleep early. I didn't sleep well last night, so I will take my leave here, Kuroto-kun. Have a good day." Saying so, Kurenai waved her hand and then left in the direction of her home. Kuroto glanced at Kurenai's disappearing back and thought inwardly as his eyes turned cold. Kurenai clearly knows a lot of information about my Futen clone, so why the hell is she not reporting it? Did she find something? Kuroto nodded to Itachi's crow clone, secretly keeping watch over Kurenai, then started to walk in the direction of his home. In the evening, as promised, Kuroto came to the izakaya, where Asuma had booked a private room for the night. Because it was still a little early, so only Asuma and Kakashi, who were forcibly dragged here, were present. When Kuroto walked into the private room, he noticed that Kakashi and Asuma were discussing something with a very serious expression. Taking a seat next to Asuma, Kuroto asked casually, "What are you two talking about with such serious expression?" Asuma answered with a distracted tone, "Kakashi is giving me advice on how to make Kurenai fall in love with me." Kuroto snickered. "He himself is a single dog. How can he give you advice?" Asuma's face changed all of a sudden, and it was at this moment he realized, "Yeah, no wonder the tricks he taught me didn't work at all." Kakashi said with a rare serious expression, "You can't say that, Kuroto. My advice is sure to work. After all, they are all taken from a legendary book." "What book?" asked Kuroto with a confused expression as picked up a bottle of sake. Kakashi quickly fumbled through his shinobi bag and took out a small book with an orange cover, and showed it to Kuroto and Asuma. This book. The orange cover of the book had illustrations of a woman and a man drawn on it, and its title was written in conspicuous red characters, which read as Aika Aika Paradise. Puff. Kuroto, who had just taken a sip of sake, suddenly sprayed it out, as soon as he realized what book Kakashi was talking about. Cough cough. After controlling his coughs, and wiping away the corners of his mouth, Kuroto can't help but think in amazement. What is this scenario? A book written by an old single dog was regarded as a treasure by a young single dog, and then passed on to another single dog. Kuroto doesn't know if Kakashi knows who the author of Aika Aika Paradise is, but Kuroto knows well enough. Aika Aika Paradise is authorized by a lifelong old single dog Jiraiya, a fool who has pursued Tsunade Hime for most of his life, but has never succeeded in winning her heart. Kakashi looked at Kuroto with a strange expression and asked, "Why is your reaction too big?" Asuma snatched Kakashi's Aika Aika Paradise, and while looking through it, he muttered, "I have heard of this book. It is said that the sales are very good." Kakashi nodded repeatedly and said in a deep tone, "Of course, it's the legendary Aika Aika Paradise, and the sales of this book are off the charts. I was barely able to buy it after spending 3 whole days in line. Kuroto sighed, shook his head in disdain, and said nothing more. Asuma saw Kuroto's disapproving expression, closed the book, and asked, Kuroto, do you have a good way to make a girl fall in love with me? Kuroto said with a smirk, Heh, I am sorry, Asuma. I don't understand the troubles of you single dogs. Seeing the smirk on Kuroto's face, Asuma's face turned dark. Yeah, how can I ever forget? This bastard has always made all of us single dogs burn in envy since the academy days. I don't know why, but I suddenly have a very strong urge to beat you up. Yes, me too. Kakashi also nodded in agreement with Asuma. Cut, weakling, snorted Kuroto in a mocking tone, then completely ignored the two and took a sip of sake. But Asuma kept staring at him and didn't mean to turn away even if Kuroto ignored him. After a while of silence and a few sips of sake, Kuroto could no longer bear the begging look of Asuma and sighed. All right, fine, don't go gloomy. I will give you some advice. With that, Kuroto became the date doctor and started to give some advice to Asuma. Of course, he didn't mean to go overboard like Will Smith lest Asuma starts coming to him for all the things and problems he is facing. While Kuroto was talking, Asuma and Kakashi were listening intently. Hate opened the door and walked in, greeted the 3 people in the private room, and consciously sat on the side and listened to the conversation of the 3 seniors. In actuality, Hate is a few years younger than Asuma, Kakashi, and Kuroto, but because of the outbreak of the Third Great Shinobi War, he had to graduate early, so he can barely be regarded as a shinobi of the same generation. Moreover, Hate is still Kuroto's subordinate. But Hate has always treated Kuroto and the others as seniors, and has always maintained a respectful attitude towards them. This is also the reason why he generally uses the suffix senpai, or san, when referring to Kuroto, Kakashi, and others. After a while of advising, Kuroto casually asked Asuma, By the way, what did Kakashi teach you today? Asuma replied, Kakashi told me that I should invite Kurenai on a hot spring trip. I even have the coupons ready. What do you think of this idea? Ahem. After a light cough to attract Kuroto and Asuma's attention to himself, Kakashi said with particular emphasis, According to Aika Aika Paradise, this trick is referred to as nirvana and has a 100% success rate. A hot spring trip, huh? Kuroto muttered and started to think of something. It's been a while since I have been on a hot spring trip with Yui. Maybe I should consider taking her on one. Asuma asked eagerly, Do you think inviting Kurenai on a hot spring trip would work? Listening to the discussion between Asuma, Kakashi, and Kuroto, Hate was a bit dumbfounded. He raised his hand weakly and said, Asuma-san, have you confessed to Kurenai-senpai? And are you two already dating? Asuma shook his head and said, I haven't confessed yet. I want to take Kurenai on a few dates, then confess to her. Hate suddenly became speechless and said, You two aren't even dating yet? Then I suggest that you don't invite Kurenai-senpai to go on a hot spring trip straight off the bat. It would be very rude and disrespectful toward her. If it is with a lot of people of both genders, then the trip could be taken as fun, enjoyment, and relaxation, but with just you and Kurenai-senpai alone, she would definitely feel uncomfortable. Even if she trusts you as a friend and comrade, it doesn't mean she would be willing to go so far just based on that trust. Asuma quickly asked Hate, Then what should I do? Hate groaned for a moment, then said, Kurenai-senpai has a strong personality, and she is an independent woman. Moreover, she is an orphan and has nobody but herself to depend upon. True, we are her friends and would be willing to help her wherever we can, but there is always a wall between people that cannot be broken with just pure friendship and camaraderie, and nobody but ourselves knows what kind of people we truly are at our core. As far as I know, people with such a background are generally vulnerable in their hearts and try to cover their inner weaknesses and fears with a strong outer shell to hide their true selves from others. Kurenai-senpai is no different. So if you want to make her fall in love with you, then you have to at least give her a sense of security. You have to make her feel that you are someone she can truly depend on. You have to make her believe that no matter what her inner self is like, you won't judge her and treat her as herself, so that she can open up her true inner self to you. Kakashi looked at Hate with pure admiration. His gaze clearly indicated he is in the presence of a god. Even Kuroto can't help but nod at what Hate said, because he was somewhat correct indeed, and can't help but think, no wonder Yugao is in love with him. He is more of a date doctor than I am. Of course, I am not much bad either, at least. I would like to believe that I am not bad when compared to Hate. Asuma, on the other hand, looked at Hate as if he has found his new best friend. He got up from his own seat, sat next to Hate, tossed his arm around Hate's shoulder, and asked, And how do I do that? Hate blushed a little at how he suddenly became the center of all attention, but seriously thought about Asuma's question, then said, Well, the fastest way to give someone a sense of security is to be very strong than them. If you become strong enough to make Kurenai-senpai admire you, she will obviously feel a sense of security in your presence. That sense of security will slowly grow into trust, and at that time, if you treat Kurenai-senpai as an equal, don't judge her for her flaws, help her in the areas you feel the need to, but also give her enough space to not make her feel overwhelmed in your presence. Be honest with her, and don't hide your own vulnerabilities from her. Then that admiration will slowly and steadily become love. At least, that's what I think. Strong, huh? Asuma started to think and muttered. But it's a bit difficult. If it comes to overall strength, Asuma is obviously stronger than Kurenai. But Kurenai is an expert in genjutsu, and her genjutsu proficiency is very high. After months of discussions with Uchiha Itachi, her mastery and understanding of genjutsu have increased sharply. Additionally, she has also started to learn Fuinjutsu. So, even a bit of negligence may as well result in Asuma's defeat. True, Asuma may have a greater chance of winning if the two were to fight, but his strength is nowhere near enough to reach the level that Kurenai would admire him. Hate nodded. It is indeed difficult. Asuma sighed. You mean I don't have a chance? Hate shrugged. If Asuma-san is willing to work hard in training, and not give up on Kurenai-senpai, then perhaps you may have a chance. While Asuma was distressed, the others also started to arrive in groups of 1 and 2. Yugao Kurenai, then Guy later Anko, Ebisu, Ibiki, Yumimiya, along with the others. A few minutes later, the gate was pushed open, and this time 2 more kunoichi hurriedly walked in, which quieted down the entire room. As soon as she walked in, Shizen asked, "We aren't late, right?" Asuma said, "Well, just in time." Shizen nodded. "Huh, that's good then. It's a rare holiday Tsunade-sama gave us. If we had gotten late, then I would have really regretted it." Yui, who was standing just behind Shizen, said, "I told you, Shizen, we aren't late, and yet you made me run all the way." Shizen immediately said, "I was just a little excited." Yui sighed and looked around for Kuroto, of course. She didn't have to search too much as Kuroto was already waving his hands. As soon as she saw Kuroto, Yui beamed a smile and walked towards him. Guy, who was sitting next to Kuroto, consciously stood up. "Here you go." Yui nodded with a grateful smile. "Thank you, Guy-san." Then sat next to Kuroto and started talking about a lot of things. Guy nodded with a knowing smile and walked towards the seat next to Kakashi and sat down. Shizen also found herself a seat and sat. As more and more people gathered, the room became lively. And because almost everyone is from the same generation, has spent their academy life together, performed a lot of missions, and fought many enemies together, so everyone was quite casual with each other and chatted quite casually. While everyone was discussing something or the other, Asuma approached Kurenai and asked, "The old man didn't embarrass you today, right?" Kurenai shook her head and said with a smile, "Hokage-sama just read the report, asked me a few questions casually, then instructed me to rest properly in order to recover as soon as possible." Kakashi frowned when he heard Kurenai's words. Hokage-sama didn't ask in detail? This incident concerned not only Orochimaru and S-Class Missing Nin, who was able to summon Shodame Hokage-sama and Naidame Hokage-sama, but also Amatsukami. In Kakashi's view, Hokage-sama shouldn't be negligent about such a matter. Seeing that Kurenai was unwilling to mention this matter more, Asuma quickly changed the subject. "Oyaji has indeed been a bit strange lately. Most of the time he would be absent-minded. It has also started to worry me as of late." Vuin 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 vuin. Suddenly, there was a sharp alarm resounding outside the window. Everyone in the room just looked out of the window without much tension on their face, because the village has already announced that there will be an evacuation drill in the eastern part of the village this evening. Yugao whispered lightly, "This is the 3rd time already, right? How come the evacuation drills are being held so frequently these days?" Yumimiya said, "Maybe it is to prepare the villagers' reaction to a sudden emergency, and make them aware of what paths to take so that the casualty count decreases." Shizen asked in a wondering tone, "But what emergency can there be at such a time? And that too in the village?" Kuroto said lightly, "Perhaps Akatsuki's revenge." As soon as Kuroto's words fell, a solemn silence dawned in the room. Everyone stopped whatever they were doing and everyone's breath was held for a moment. Kuroto could feel Yui's hand tighten around the cuff of his sleeve, indicating that she is worried about his safety. "This girl," sighed Kuroto, then rubbed the backside of Yui's hand in silence to reassure her that nothing would happen to him. The silence brought by Kuroto's words continued until the evacuation drill was completed. In fact, Kuroto can see that everyone present here has more or less noticed some things. After all, everyone is either a Jonin, Tokubetsu Jonin, or an Umbu. The people in this room make up the elite forces of Konoha and are the future backbone of the village. So how can such people not notice these things? However, the one who knows the most is probably Kuroto, because no one in this room other than him knows that 4 of the 5 Kage have already gathered in Konoha, and the only remaining Tsuchikage is also on his way.